Hello, welcome, workers and friends. Welcome back to Working Class Revolt. I'm one of your hosts, Dust James, the Marxist Leninist truck driver, coming to you live from my humble home in rural North Carolina. And as always, we got my great co-host, labor organizer, union organizer from down under, from Australia, Brother David Fox. How's it going?
Yeah, good. Very busy, but otherwise good.
Right on, right on. So we got a returning guest who is recently joined the Workers Party, and Marxist Leninist Great Britain Party as well. I probably butchered those names. He'll correct me. But we're actually trying to may bring him on as a full time co-host of Working Class Revolt as well. Brother William Morrison of Scotland. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing fine, thank you, Dust. Yeah, I'm an active member of the Workers' Party of Britain and the Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist-Leninist, the CPGBML. It's a bit of an alphabet soup name, but here in Britain, we're pretty much the main communist party, so we just call ourselves the communists. So,
Can I just add on that? Can I just give a big shout out to all the communist of Great Britain, Marxist Leninist, fantastic party, and also the Workers' Party of Britain as well, and George Galloway. I don't know if he likes to watch these shows, but I like to actually give a big shout out to all these all comrades of mine in a bigger class struggle.
Absolutely.
Right on. So last week we did our study on Plan de Ayala from Emiliano Zapata, and that was very good. We're going to continue our study series. I think we're studying Garvey next. We haven't planned it yet. This is a work meeting, and today we're going to be talking about the history of Mayday, International Workers' Day, as well as some of our own experiences. Me and David, both veteran organizers, we can talk about some of the stuff we've been through. And I've asked our young comrade William to start us out with a bit of the history behind Mayday. Take it away, brother.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, essentially, the history of the labour movement and the history of the workers' struggle for improvement of rights and stuff has pretty much existed since industrial capitalism has existed. That's kind of one of the main inherent contradictions within capitalism. They want to, view themselves as this omnipotent force, this perfect force, but it's not. There's an underlying contradiction. There's many underlying contradictions within capitalism, and one of them is the fact that working conditions are so poor, and it needs to be for capitalism to benefit and develop and achieve what it wants to achieve. There has to be underlying contradictions, and there is, So yeah, so to begin with, the history of the May Day and the International Workers' Day, it traces back to pretty much the existence, the predominance of industrial capitalism. Ever since industrial factories were built, working conditions have been poor, and working conditions, in like Victorian England and Victorian Britain, and the late 1800s USA, working conditions were so poor. It was the first time that work had been socialized. Social life was evolved around, work. People lived here in Britain. People lived in the factories they worked in. That they lived there. They had accommodation attached to the factories they worked in. So it was the first time that people socialized around the means of production. They socialized around in factories, and they spoke to each other. And they talked about how grotesque and inhumane the working conditions of the working class were, and how one person, one factory owner, got most of the profit and benefited from all of their hard work. It very quickly, when industrial capitalism came to Britain and the developed world, there was widespread social discontent towards it. There was slum housing, there was extreme poverty, there was starvation. Just back in Victorian Britain, for example, I'm obviously speaking from a British perspective, but horrible, horrible scenes, unimaginable. We can't even imagine what it must have been like to live in those days. And that's all thanks to the glorious capitalist system, which has just absolutely failed the human race. It's absolutely failed miserably. So the history of Mayday and what it really goes back to is all thanks to the introduction for capitalism. It's workers coming together, and back in the late 1800s, it was comrades and workers in Chicago and New York and stuff that were going on strike and protesting against their working conditions, and they were coming together and they were forming unions and stuff like that. And obviously, in 1864, the first Internationale was made. The first Internationale, Karl Marx had a huge influence in the creation of that. And it was a beacon of hope. It was a beacon of inspiration for the international working class. It was the first kind of pushback against capitalist exploitation and oppression from the working class. And the Communist Manifesto by Marx and Engels were a huge influencer in the creation and maintenance of the first Internationale. And yeah, even then, we had, in that period of time in history, we had stuff like the Paris Commune and stuff, which were philosophically educated and enlightened French workers that rose up against the French aristocracy and kind of feudalistic, kind of capitalist hybrid that they had back then. And it worked, the Paris Commune and stuff. So that was a really huge step, huge progression for the working class. An entire city was operated by the working class, nobody else. There wasn't any, bourgeois, bureaucratic class in the days of the Paris Commune. And that was kind of the first time where workers rose up. It was the first workers' revolution. Before then, because of that time of period, it was bourgeois revolutions. It was the bourgeois class overthrowing the aristocracy and the feudalistic societies. So the Paris Commune was the first time where it was workers rising up, and they were fighting against this oppressive system, and they were fighting for basic protections. They weren't even fighting for anything that radical nowadays. In today's standards, they were fighting for pretty basic stuff. So yeah, but obviously, moving on, there was the Second International was made in 1889. It was created because of an ideological shift and the changing attitudes. Different socialist and workers' parties, kind of analyzed things quite differently, and there was some fracturing and disagreements. So they decided to move on and make the Second International, but that was already inherent with problems. At this point, the social democratic movement, the social democracy, people like Kautsky, reformists and opportunists hijacked the Second International, and real socialists, real Marxist-Leninists, and real people that actually cared about the improvement of conditions for the working class were pushed aside. They were pushed and alienated aside, and these quite moderate reformist social democrats, they weren't really revolutionaries. Stalin in his theoretical works made that pretty clear, that they did not represent the working class at all. So even then, things did improve. There was slight reforms. There were some slight improvements to working conditions in the developed world anyway. But I mean, yeah. And then obviously in 1886, so 3 years before the Second International, was the Haymarket Massacre, where comrades in the USA, millions of US comrades and workers went on strike, and their demands weren't that radical. They weren't that revolutionary. They were pretty common sense demands, and the charter was made, and it was nothing too it was nothing too radical. It was basic stuff like a reduction of the 12-hour or 10-hour workday, a reduction of that. There was like sick leave, stuff like that. If you got the cold back then, you were pretty much sacked on the spot, and you had to find a different job and somewhere else when you got better. There wasn't really any protections for people who were ill. If you got the cold, you were sacked. Boom. Well, you're not useful to us anymore. You can't make profit. So those were the demands of the people that went on strike in places like Chicago and New York. And obviously the Haymarket Massacre, which reports say 11 people were killed, but there was obviously varying statistics there about the injuries and deaths. But ultimately, the point is that that event was probably the most influential part of the workers' movement. A famous scholar once said that no event has ever influenced the workers' movement so much in history than the Haymarket Massacre. And that's a scholar, Dr. William, a scholar in the US. He said that, and I guess it's true. Nothing has really pushed forward and like propelled progress for improvement of working conditions than the Haymarket Massacre. Because after that, there was reform after reform after reform of workers' rights, and it was a good thing. But I mean, obviously, it'll never be perfect. Capitalism is a system that benefits from infinite growth on a planet that has finite resources. So it's never going to be even close to adequate in this current society that we're living in the current epoch that we're living in. It's never going to be perfect. But I think that's quite a pessimistic view. I think every single advance and every single slight improvement that the workers' movement has made, and our forefathers and our fighters long before that fought and sacrificed everything to have what we have today, which is even still the bare minimum. You know, it's basic stuff we have even now. And people risked their lives. So communists and trade unionists died and sacrificed their lives to fight for basic stuff like maternity leave and sick pay and some holidays, you know. God, you know, workers having a few days break a week from work, unheard of back then. But it was because of communists and really dedicated workers that's a thing now. That's just normal. That's just accepted. When you're applying for a job, you're going to look at the flexibility and the holidays and stuff. That's thanks to the work that our comrades in the workers' movement have done for nearly 200 years, you know, 2 centuries of fight and struggle against the capitalist system. And even now we have the bare minimum, as I said prior. But yeah, we have. It's important to celebrate every single piece of progress that we make, because every progress we make is progress for the entirety of the international working class everywhere. It's a sign of it's inspiring. It's a sign of hope and optimism. Whereas a setback is a setback for the entirety of the international working class. If something doesn't go well in the US, there's ripples worldwide that affect third world and developing nations. So we really have to stick together. We are one class. We are the working class, the proletariat, and we all have one class. We have the same class interests. So progress for one is a progress for all, and a setback for one is a setback for all. So that's kind of the philosophy that I'm going with here. But yeah, I mean, Mayday is such an important thing for billions of workers across the planet. The 1st of May is a day of hope and optimism. You know, it's a hope and optimism that current conditions don't have to be like this forever. There will be better. You know, we will fight for better days and better treatment and stuff like that. That's an inherent kind of principle in the whole workers' movement. And then Mayday, you know, Mayday represents, Mayday represents so much, you know, the welfare state, the 8-hour work day, the maternity leave, sick pay, holidays, protections against oppressive bosses. Those are all thanks to the work and commitment and fight and struggle that our comrades have given the capitalist class for the past 200 years, you know. So yeah, we ought to celebrate that, you know. We live in a really, really difficult place right now. We always have under capital. If you're a working class, you're going to get it bad. So we've always had it pretty bad, but that doesn't mean that we just have to give in and accept that negativity and pessimism and slip into those dark places. There is hope, and Mayday is that day of hope. You know, for billions of people across the planet, the International Workers' Day is the day that's just the most inspiring. It's a whole day that's committed to thanking and celebrating the hard work of the working class, not just in one country or for a specific thing, but internationally, in general, the entire work of the working class is congratulated there. And obviously there's different attitudes towards that. In capitalist nations like the UK, we do things like applaud for the NHS workers. Everyone in Britain stands outside at 6 p.m. and we clap for 2 minutes for the hard work that the NHS and the NHS workers do and healthcare workers do in Britain. That doesn't do anything to really help. And in countries like China and Cuba, they're kind of like the the party ravers when it comes to the attitudes towards the workers' movement. They are so enthusiastic. Obviously, the people of Cuba and the people of China and all other actualist and socialist nations, the people are statistically so grateful for the work of the revolutionary leadership. And so, yeah, there's a disparity there between the attitudes. Capitalist nations are like, yeah, we'll clap, we'll acknowledge workers, whereas socialist nations are like, we helped liberate them. We helped them. We led them to fight against the capitalist nations. So that's pretty telling. But ultimately, Mayday, International Workers' Day, is an amazing day and has a long, long history, ranging from lots of different movements and strikes and protests. But it's a history of struggle. It's a history of struggle between the worker and the boss on an individual level, or the working class against the bourgeoisie. It's a long, long history of struggle and fight for basic common sense protections against inhumane and grotesque treatment. So, yeah, I guess on a final last note, I know I've been speaking for quite a while, but on a last note, it's at the end of the day, as much as these reforms are good and are a positive thing, it'll never be even close to adequate under capitalism. We have to have a stage beyond capitalism where conditions for the working class continue to improve. There shouldn't be a barrier of virtue. It should be unlimited. So the next stage after this is obviously socialism. Socialism is the next stage of the development of the working class, and that is when basic foundations of building and empowering and liberating and protecting workers against the evil parasite that is capitalism really, really begins. That's where the fight begins, with the development of a new era of socialism. Because right now, things are difficult for billions and billions of workers across the planet. Life is a struggle, and it doesn't have to be so hard. It's hard for us because it profits somebody else and it benefits somebody else. That's it. That's the main thing. So we just have forward. We can be grateful for everything that's happened for the past, and May Day should be a day to celebrate and show the utmost of gratitude to our forefathers who sacrificed everything for what we have today. And I guess just May Day should also be a day where we look forward to the future and continue that fight. Hold the banner for them, hold their torch and continue the fight for improvement for the working class. So, yeah, solidarity and comradeship forever.
Thank you, brother. Thank you, brother, for that great verbal presentation. Yeah, I mean, let's see. I just put a one liner in there. May Day, it is the celebration of solidarity. Solidarity meaning it's a culture, it's a movement, it's a power, it's a force to be reckoned with. It's more than an idea. Last week we took off for Easter, and next week we're taking off for May Day. So David can be out there in the streets. So let's get on. I got a little bit more to say about the history of May Day, but maybe we can go over to Comrade Fox. Anything to contribute or to respond on the history of May Day?
Well, in Australia here, I mean, the earliest May Day marches were probably around about the 1890 mark, when Australia was still 6 colonies at the time, and there were actually a great many strikes. At the time, there was an economic depression or crisis in capitalism at the time. We had the Great Shearer strike in the 1890s, the maritime strike, and the miners' strike as well. And interesting, a lot of them actually carried both the red flag and our Eureka flag as well at the same time. And they're saying the old red flag, you got to keep this, we keep the red flag flying here. That was an old song from that period, and that was around the time of that Second International. The unions themselves, which pretty much kind of started to gain traction in the 1850s. It was just after the gold rush and the goldfields rebellions of the mid 1850s. We had a base by then. 1856 was actually the 21st of April 1856. Stonemasons of Melbourne won the 8-hour day. But however, it was still a long struggle to have that established in many other industries from there on. But we still had a lot of dire conditions. But from there, we built on and further developed our demands and our struggles. Throughout the 1880s, there was establishments of the trades halls, or union halls, otherwise known as, or union councils, around the place. Victoria Trades Hall Council being the oldest. I think Bendigo's out the third oldest or fourth oldest here in Australia as well, where I am. And they were very important bodies to bring all people and trade unions together to coordinate actions and resolve disputes, but also to create solidarity as a class as well. But throughout that time, there on a tradition was set. And for Mayday itself, there was obviously a struggle to keep it on 1st of May as well. I know in Queensland it eventually became a public holiday. They call it Labor Day, but they have it on the first Monday of May. And obviously there was also a pushback against conservative or reactionary forces to change Labor Day. And unfortunately, in the various states, Labor Day is on different different dates. Here in Victoria, it's the second Monday of March. However, I mean, it still doesn't stop us from moving to try and keep Mayday alive. And for many years, obviously, a lot of unions go, well, let's make it the first Sunday of May. They will hopefully get everyone together in interest. But I think there's also a genuine push now. No, we want to have Mayday on 1st of May. And where I'm involved with Bendigo Trades Hall Council, we actually made that concrete decision. No, our Mayday rally is May the 1st. We can have breakfasts and functions all around that on different days, but May the 1st is our rally. And we want to keep it at that. And it's vitally important because it's also an international movement as well. Working class is international. So we want to actually link up with our comrades from all overseas in March on the same day. And instead of having a different day of the year. So that's vitally important. And also important too has been the struggle about the content of Mayday for a long time. Yes, we need to celebrate our wins and what we achieved so far, but we also too what demands are affecting the working class again. And what we're trying to do now is give it that direction again. Start with the bread and butter first, but obviously then these are immediate issues that affect workers, and we want to move forward with it. And I've got a little flyer for our Mayday up there as well in Bendigo, and it's the poppet head on it. And one thing we've also 3 demands we got on there: living income for all, close the gender pay gap, and increase public housing to meet demand. And obviously, we want to talk about the cost of living measures, because here in Australia, it's just like anywhere else around the world, prices have gone up on everything, and workers are finding it hard to make ends meet. So that's an important one to close the gender pay gap. I mean, women are especially affected. I don't know about in the US or in Britain there if you've actually got superannuation schemes, but we haven't. And what happens, though, there's a certain percentage that's calculated off your ordinary earnings, which is your 38 hours. But if you happen to be a woman, female, and you have to be, say, take maternity leave off, most of it unpaid or unable to work whatever time, you don't get it. So the time they retire in their mid-60s or in 67, they fall short of what they have, of what they should be getting. Now, not unless they have an investment property, their own home, and another $1 million somewhere else or whatever. And I'll just use as a bigger speech. But if you go to all these other great investments, they're really going to find it very hard in retirement. So these are basically little demands. I'm just going down to some of the detail here. and even to increase public housing to meet demand. I mean, now we have a generation that will never ever be able to own our own house anymore. Actually, there's a lot of many other people will never be able to buy a house anymore. Right? The property is just through the roof. We're say in the circa 1950s and 60s, which actually, interesting enough, the Communist Party originally led for affordable housing and working class. You were actually able to pay your house off within 5 years. Now it'll take you, if not, you've got consistent employment right through and on a good wage, you'd be lucky to get that paid in 30 years or more. So it's something these are vital issues that we want to look at. So we develop there, but what we want to do is build it from there as well, and understand only through solidarity and class action where we are able to actually achieve these aims, because it wasn't given to us, and that's an important thing as well. I mean, the 8-hour day wasn't just given to us by any chance. I mean, we have a 38-hour week here since 1981, but that was actually developed through struggle. It wasn't. It just didn't happen to go, oh, that's a great idea, we'll just put it through and give it to you. And I think that's vitally important. All the wins that working class people from around the world gain, it's actually through struggle, not through just a good act of legislation, just because we've got a nice prime minister or some goodwill in Parliament or whatever side to grant it. None of that. It's actually done through struggle. And unfortunately, there are some out there that sort of want to focus just on the political, within just getting people into Parliament. Oh, we've got to change this. We have to get these people into Parliament. But the thing is that where it falls short, it is quite empty, because it's not based on struggle. Where the real fights are in the workplace, out in the streets, and it's only when we have the ability to withdraw our labour, where production stops altogether, we can then got them, and we are able to achieve these things. So that's why what we will try with Mayday here is looking for all workers to assume the power. I mean, a boss or employer or a group of employers or capitalist is only in the business to make a profit, where a worker has only got the ability to sell their labour to try and make ends meet and make a living. So that's vitally important. That's why we need to assume the power and get in control of our own destination, our own self-determination as working class people, and that's the key to it. When we're talking, and I've heard people talk about an independent working class agenda, or independent from whom, what? No. I think we need to actually get control of the matters of ourselves and take control of it again, not just rely on some knight in shining armour to come along one day and save the world, because that isn't going to happen. We have to actually get back to that and learn from all these lessons. And Mayday is a perfect time to do that, and not only discuss, but have that sense of unity and build on it as well. I mean, we've still got a long way to go here in Australia as well, just like the UK and America. I mean, unions over years, we've lost a lot of gains, and we've had a lot of nasty legislation thrown at unions and working class organisation as well. So we've lost a lot over the years as well. So we're no different from anyone else. But what's vitally important is that we need to have a look at it and see how we're going to actually talk about building working class power again. And I think that's the discussion we need to get back on the agenda again, and how we're going to actually support each other, not just in the workplace, but also outside of it, in the community at large, and wherever we associate. And look, my experiences with Mayday over the years I've been involved. Actually, I've been fortunate to be in many Maydays around Australia, both in Sydney, Darwin, Brisbane. Brisbane one's huge, even though it's the first Monday, mate. It's quite a big event. And also over in Perth when I lived over there, lived over in Western Australia. They have it in Fremantle on the port side of it on the first Sunday of May. So that's always a good turnout, but not obviously in Melbourne, but up here in Bendigo. So I've had some great experiences mixing with different people on there. But I think it's very important we make sure that Mayday has got key working class demands on it, and also the sense of solidarity and how we're going to build working class power again. Thank you.
Thank you, brother, for that presentation on Australian Mayday. Maybe I can talk a little bit more of the history in the United States. I'm from the United States, and even in Europe and Australia and the imperialist bloc, people usually don't associate the United States to lead imperialist power with progressivism or with workers' rights. But this Mayday was an American holiday. It's something to be proud of in our history. That working people from all over the world, throughout Eastern European immigrants and others, came to the lead industrial power and faced horrible conditions and fought back against them and won victories. And it's a beautiful thing to celebrate. I mean, you think about this now, we're looking at is 2022 in the United States. And a lot of people don't even know what a labor union is. Only 13% of the population has unions, and the majority of those are in the public sector. It is absolutely disgusting. And what has gotten us into this situation? Reaganomics, Reagan's policies, anti-worker, right-to-work states, destroyed what was left of the union movement. They framed up Jimmy Hoffa. They put down the power of the Teamsters along with others. And what did they do before that? McCarthyism. They destroyed the Communist Party. They made the Communist Party illegal. They put people in jail. It was illegal to be. It is still on the books illegal to be a communist and lead a labor union. In many states in the United States the absolute suppression of the labor movement. If they can't buy you off, they physically suppress you. So we have lost our working class culture and our solidarity, and we've lost touch with our own history. Everything good that we have, everything from the weekend, everything through overtime, all of this was won through struggle. Won not by the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. That seems to be the basis of what people go off on politics. Man, I like this party because the economy was good when Clinton was in office, but I ain't got nothing of it. You know, that was just the way geopolitics worked out at that time. In reality, there is a direct correlation between the destruction of the Communist Party and a destruction of the union movement with the stagnation of wages and the loss of benefits. Everything we have came from struggle. And now that conditions are worse, if I have seen in my lifetime two recessions in 2008 and just recently with COVID and these massive bailouts of the rich, and people cannot afford housing, it's time we get a little bit of that struggle back. And, solidarity of the brothers and sisters in Europe right now, that the U.S. Government is using their junior imperialist pawns along with Australia to put austerity on the people as if it's going to stop the Russians, to attack a rising alternative global economic bloc, China, aligned with Russia, that is trying to take over, and that simply is a better economy and is slowly taking over, rightfully raising people out of poverty and no longer allowing the imperialists to exploit them. And now the people of the junior partner nations, I think it's kind of funny because, like I said earlier, we have a strong bit of history here, and people always look down. So a lot of Europeans who say they got the fight back, they got social democracy, and they got stuff over there. But a lot of what has to do with the strong union movement in Europe is their bourgeoisie is weaker compared to the imperialist core. The amount of repression that we face, the amount of propaganda that we praise, and now when the shit hits the fan, now, as the empire is in crisis, they're throwing the social democracies under the bus first. And the social democracies are not, it's not the answer. An imperialist social democracy is not the answer. They got some of the crumbs from the imperialist exploitation. And then the workers' movement fought for that. We need a new social system, and we got to break outside of imperialism. And the worsening conditions of Europe are really showing that to us right now. And we're seeing fight back and resistance, truckers' strikes. We're seeing fight back against the imposed austerity to try to hurt the Russian people. I opened up a can of worms right there in the current situation. I'd like to talk a little bit more about my experience, but maybe if we could just have a quick response, first from William and then from Brother Fox.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, there's some things I want to address that, first of all, Conrad Fox mentioned. First of all, is that the whole the gender equality. You said that was one of the demands of the 2022 Mayday in Australia, and I think that's quite fascinating. I think that shows a really good progression of the workers' movement, because when the first International was made, and when Karl Marx writing his wonderful theoretical works, socialist and workers leagues were called the working men's leagues and stuff. Because back in those days, it was mostly women were not seen as an equal part of society. They were treated as something, and actually in Victorian Britain, in embryonic stages of capitalism in Britain, factories employed mostly women and children because they could be paid less than men. It was more profitable for factories to hire women. So, I mean, at one point in Victorian England, for example, about 74% of factory workers were women, just because companies could pay them less and men had to be paid more. So I think that it just shows the progression that the workers' movement has caused. Now that isn't even a question about gender disparity in pay. That's a demand. Workers are demanding government for gender equality. So that's a really good thing. I think that that made me feel really, really kind of positive that that's a demand. And has been a demand, obviously, for pretty much the entirety of the 21st century. But it's a good thing, because in the early stages of capitalism, there was such a massive disparity, and because of the work and commitment of workers' movements, the socialist and communist parties, things have gradually improved, especially for women. So that's an absolutely amazing thing. And as Marxist-Leninists, obviously, we are obviously Marxist feminists as well. And women hold up the other half of the sky and all that wonderful stuff. So it's a really, really good and inspiring story that's a demand that's continuing to be a thing. And also another point that Conrad Fox said is that Mayday represents, working class demand. It isn't just a charter. It isn't just a request. You're not like writing emails and letters to your local representative. It's working class people demanding for better conditions. That's one thing that the Social Democrats and the actual socialists are different from. Social Democrats are just reformists. They just want slight changes, and they still want to keep the capitalist system. They'll just, they'll just give little dog biscuits to the working class every time they put up a fuss. Whereas communists don't just stand for some reform, some slight reform, and actually the maintenance of the status quo, but just slight reforms over time. So that's one thing that's inherent that I forgot to mention in my presentation, that Mayday is something that really, really represents not just working class suggestions or like asking politely. It's demanding that governments give them what they should have to have a basic living. That's a really, really important thing, and it should be a given. It should be a given. We're human beings, all on this planet. It should just be a given that's a thing. And the fact that we have to demand for basic protections is just completely. It's just completely disgusting to think that that's the thing. But I'm glad it is, and obviously Mayday is one of the very few things that working class people have to get behind to push for those demands. So that's a really good thing. And I was actually shocked by what Dust said about union membership. He said like 13% of people in the US are members of a union. I don't know what the actual.
That's correct.
Yeah. I just find that shocking. I mean, I guess Britain has it a little bit better here in the UK. Union membership is a lot higher. It's about 40 to 50%, and that most union members are in the public sector. But I think it's law here in Britain that most private companies should also have some sort of laws regarding having a union. I think in Britain, if 60% of the workers in the workforce agree to start a union, they can. So it could be a small cafe, but if 60% of the workers agree and sign their names to the creation of a union, then the union is made, and that private small company has to oblige and pander to the needs of the working class. You know how awful, but so I think we have it a little bit better in Britain, which is a good thing. But I was shocked by that. That's such a low number, and you said that a lot of people in the US don't even know what a union is. You know, it's a shocking statistic. That really got me. But another interesting thing that Dust said was that there was a correlation between the successes of the Communist Party, and there's actually a connection between when the Capitalist Party was criminalized and pretty much essentially banned in the US, and it's about that time where the workers' movement and the union movement kind of declined as well. That just shows the influence that communists really had in the workers' movement. Nowadays, people are like, oh, you know, communism's dead and we're such a small fringe thing and we have no influence on politics. What's even the point in doing our work? But back then, during like the MacArthur eras, MacArthurist USA, you know, people were phoning the police, grassing their neighbours up for being a dirty commie. It just shows that obviously before the CP was absolutely belittled and ridiculed horrifically by the US government, it was having influence on workers' movement. It was having influence on the union movement. And that's always been a thing. Ever since Lenin was around and Marx was around, communists have been embedded in unions. And that's a good thing. You know, we've been influencing more radical policies and more radical demands and stuff like that. It's a good thing that should be celebrated. But I think that's an interesting point because everyone, you know, a lot of people now have been, you know, brainwashed by decades now of bourgeois propaganda, war propaganda, and political propaganda. And most people don't even know that the propaganda is around them in their everyday lives. They just walk past it and it's like adverts and stuff. It's all just propaganda. So yeah, there is a point to be made here that the Communist Party had a massive influence on demanding improvement for conditions for the working class. So that's a good thing. And Dust also mentioned China and how they've aligned with Russia. But more generally, I think I should have mentioned that in my introduction. China is probably the most inspirational country regarding Mayday nowadays. You know, the Chinese Revolution did the most to, you know, help and liberate working class people. You know, almost 1 billion people have been raised out of poverty since 1975 in China. Not just in China, people in Africa, you know, villages in Africa, they used to, you know, rely on a water well that was just pumped from the ground. Now have, you know, free flowing water. There's infrastructure in Africa thanks to the funding and solidarity from the Chinese government. You know, there's you know, Mozambique, Tanzania, country like Rwanda, Angola. They have strong connections to the Chinese government, and thanks to the Chinese government, they have, you know, done huge things. You know, they have roads now. They have paved roads. They have clean streets. They have improved conditions. You know, living conditions. And you know, it isn't some sort of loan debt. It's just China helping out their comrades in Africa. You know, Africa has seen centuries of colonialism and exploitation and imperialism by mainly European powers. It isn't the same as the Europeans. China's there to literally just help, and that's a really good thing. But yeah, just in regards to Mayday and the International Workers' Day, China is a beacon of hope for the working class. What China has done with the leadership of the working class there is absolutely insane. You know, the membership of the Chinese Communist Party is like 3 times bigger than the British population. You know, there's 3 times more members of the Chinese Communist Party than there are the entire like population of Britain. That's an insane statistic that just mind blows, because here in Britain we're always taught that we're like a superior nation, that we're like, oh, we're the best and we have to return to the good old days. But you know, there's Chinese students and there's Chinese workers that are traveling the world because of what Chinese universities have given them, and they're changing the world, you know. And China is the leading economy, and it will be very, very soon. It's just a matter of time when China surpasses the US in regards to economic development and economic success. And And that is thanks to Mao and Deng and Xi, and that is thanks to the successes of the Chinese communists. The Soviet Union was obviously the embryonic stage to that inspiration, but obviously because of the imperialist intervention and the rise of revisionism, that came to an end, unfortunately. But China has raised the banner and carried the torch, and now they're continuing the work, and they're doing absolutely tremendously. So if you're going to celebrate Mayday and you're going to celebrate the work of the working class, you might as well celebrate the successes and advances of the Chinese as well, because the Chinese government and the Chinese Communist Party have done amazing things. So that is my response to both of your statements.
All right. Maybe man, you kind of got me inspired on that one. I mean, like I said, people don't even know what a union is, let alone that communism is a good thing, let alone that communism is an American thing. You go, it is our universities, the academia, which is completely controlled by the bourgeoisie, has tried to wipe the history of American communism off the earth. If you look at, it's okay to talk about the IWW. The IWW was a great union, and it was, pre-Soviet Revolution, and the Wobblies were tough and fighters, and they would take songs and popular songs and they'd rewrite them and promoted a culture of solidarity. An industrial worker means not a trade worker. Some of the more trade unions that didn't want the so-called rabble, they only wanted the skilled workers, mostly white Anglo workers, to get the better positions. An industrial worker is all of the workers. It's all of the people on the line. The so-called low skill, that's a myth. The industrial workers are praised, and rightfully so. But you know what's not talked about in academia in the United States is the CIO. Now, right now we talk about the AFL CIO. That's an emergence. The AFL was more of a trade union. The CIO was more of an industrial, large scale mass union, and it was led by communists, and it was made and led by communists that were in the Third International and were linked into and found inspiration from the Soviet Union. And you do not hear about that at all. You do not hear about the great William Z. Foster, who was in alliance with Stalin and was inspired by the work that the people have done. And just recently, the Union Campaign, which is a reemergence of industrial unionism with the Amazon workers and brother Chris Small. It was put out in an article that one of the main organizing materials that they used was a guidebook and manual put out by the great William Z. Foster. And the Center for Political Innovation and Working Class Revolt has been trying to resurrect the stolen history of William Z. Foster, the Communist Party, and militant union organizing. This show, Working Class Revolt, started as a study, a study of William Z. Foster's The History of Three Internationals, and that's in 6 seconds, 6-section playlist that people can go back and watch. You got me inspired, brother. Let's see, brother David Fox. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, well, actually, that book, The History of the Three Internationals by William Z. Foster, I highly recommend it to everybody to read that. It's it's actually a great introduction to Marxism, really, when you think about it. And it also shows you, too, matter in motion, how everything's in a constant state of change. It's a fantastic read. I highly recommend it. I wish I had a copy of it in front of me. I would actually show it to you. The other thing, actually, you mentioned Amazon, and that for us in Australia, that's been actually quite inspirational. I a big shout out and my hats off to all those people in Amazon that had it unionised. I mean, this is where Mayday can play a really important role. It could just show it can be done under even some of the most difficult circumstances, and we should be having that solidarity hey, look, we can do it at Amazon. We can do it practically anywhere. And it just, and I think that's something we've got to look at as well, and what they and learn from what they did differently. I believe it was Amazon workers in New York and two other big plants they have over there. And I think we need to learn from it. I know they started off in Alabama. Didn't go terribly too well there, but they didn't give up. They actually then processed and kept moving, learned from their lessons and how we're going to win people over. And I think we should actually look at that, and even just on that line, how as an organising discussion in the future, I think we should look at that. Well, how were they successful in achieving having Amazon unionised? I mean, here he is, Jeff Bezos. I mean, he's one of the most wealthiest people on the planet, and they're throwing like millions and millions and millions of dollars to try and keep it non-union. But in fact, is it lawyers and everything else, all sorts of campaigns, and you think. I mean, anyone with half a brain would be just going like, well, "Why would you want to waste money like that for? What's the point? What are you scared of?" And that's what the key question is. Well, that's not the key question, but that's the key point. Fact is, not just one single employer, but all employers, all capitalists are scared of organised labour. The workers are unionised and organised. They're an unstoppable force, and that's a message where on Mayday we should actually put that out everywhere we are. And but I said the Amazon one itself that'd be make a great discussion one time. I'd love to have an Amazon worker on our show or one of the key organisers behind it because it's fantastic. We can learn from it. And I mean, I know people who are within the union spectrum, but this is a great way of doing it. And I mean, our role as scientific socialists, as communists, is to turn unions into schools of communism, into schools of class struggle, and win the workers over socialism and that as well. And actually, interesting, I've just been reading out of Volume 3, Left Wing Communism and Infantile Disorder again. I wanted to actually read over that, a few things in this book. And Lenin actually specifies it's important that we actually work in unions, regardless if they're really conservative or reactionary or not trying to start up our own thing outside of it. If it hasn't got mass support, it won't happen. But that's where a group of where workers are concentrated. We need to be in there. We need to put our line through and explain to workers it's a long, tedious struggle, sure, but however, it needs to be put forth and the line put forth. Material conditions are changing now. We see it. You mentioned Europe before, Dust. Material conditions are changing everywhere in the world, so people's consciousness is changing. They'll be start questioning the whole things. I mean, even when where all this imperialist action on towards China that and using Australia as a proxy and explain it. And not only explain, workers might not see it yet, but they will. They're going to get sick of all this billions and hundreds of billions of dollars being thrown at war while everyone else suffers. And when the conditions get worse here, people's thinking will start changing. So this is fantastic where we can work from there. So that's it's something worthwhile to have a look in the future. That's something we can discuss after the show if you like. We can talk a little bit more about if we're keen to get an Amazon. Sorry, I had a massive brainwave there. I thought we've got to get someone from Amazon on our show. Thanks, Dustin.
Let's say I wanted to get into kind of my experience with Mayday. Was there anything you had to add before I went into that, Comrade William? Okay, you're muted, but I'll go ahead into that.
Sorry about that. Where you go, mate?
That's fine. So, I came up in the rural. Well, I started out. We were economic refugees from upstate New York, northern Appalachia. We came down to the South at a lot of the same time that a lot of immigrants from southern Mexico were coming in. This is 1995. This is 1 year after NAFTA passed, the North American Free Trade Agreement. And my family, the South, the Black Belt South, is particularly known for having horrible anti-worker laws. And a lot of this has to do with the legacy of Jim Crow and the legacy of slavery and racism. And so they were moving at the same time. A bunch of immigrants were coming up from the South. because of imperialism, because of imperialist laws from the Democratic Party that flooded cheap corn into Mexico and destroyed the southern corn belt in Mexico, had people coming up. A lot of the factories that were more unionized, what was left of the union movement, was largely in the north. And before stuff really started getting sent out overseas and getting started down in Mexico, they moved a lot of the factories from up north down south, which had worse labor laws and worse conditions. I remember working in a sweatshop in a cosmetic factory, Coty International, and I remember some of the folks came down from Jersey, some of the big wigs, and I was sitting there on the line. This was a summer job, and he goes up and he says, "Oh man, the workers down here are great. These are mostly undocumented workers, Mexican immigrants and other immigrants from Latin America, as well as a few poor whites and poor blacks mixed in, who were largely the straw hat bosses or line leaders." But he got this dude from Jersey comes down. He's touring the factory, and one of the bosses who's touring the factory says, "Man, these North Carolina workers, they're great. They don't complain and they love their job. They're not like those horrible Jersey people who have a union and speak up for themselves because they're in constant fear because of the attack, which is the legal system of immigration and undocumented status, hooked with racism and racist immigration laws. I mean, as well as dividing the workers." So I get in a little bit of my background to talk about this. We didn't know what a union was. The conditions at the job sites were absolutely horrible. Racism being promoted, undocumented status of our immigrant brothers and sisters, and this is the kind of stuff I grew up in and around. And by the time I got to high school, because I was an economic refugee, and I didn't really fit in with a lot of the more stabilized labor aristocracy, mostly white community. And I made a lot of friends in the black community and the immigrant community. I had very close ties with and a lot of friends in the immigrant community. There's a big day in U.S. history, and that is Mayday 2006. Mayday 2006 was an immigrant workers' revolt. It was the largest demonstration in U.S. history. George W. Bush, and the Iraq War president that the liberals have now tried to regenerate and say, "Oh, he's better than Trump" or what have you. The invader of Iraq, the racist fake cowboy from Connecticut, was trying to push. It was actually interesting. McCain and Bush were actually not as anti-immigrant as some of the pre-Trump movement, the pre-Tea Party movement. There was a lot of this that you could really see the beginnings of the Tea Party movement, and there was this disgusting anti-immigrant law that got through Congress. And what it essentially said was that if you helped out an undocumented worker, if you gave food to an undocumented worker, if you gave housing to an undocumented worker, then that was a felon. And this was too much for the masses of the immigrant working population. And there was a massive spontaneous revolt and a mass strike in 2006. And immigrant Mexicans, Chicanos, Latin Americans who were also tied. You think about the Southwest, and you think about how the border crossed the Chicanos. A lot of the people have been in the Southwest. Mexican people, Chicanos, have been in the Southwest longer than the U.S. has been there, but they're looked as foreigners in their own country and treated as second-class citizens in their own country with full documented rights, is along and worked alongside undocumented brothers and sisters from Latin America. And you got to think about that was just a step too far. And it was a massive uprising. And I think I was 16 when this happened, and I started noticing the racism that was going on to my immigrant Mexican brothers and sisters. And I was inspired by it. I thought it was beautiful. And in that demonstration, there was there was nationalism, there was get out of Aslan Gringo, there was these pictures that came up saying who you call an immigrant pilgrim, and a bunch of stuff, pictures of Che Guevara, labor militancy. And this goes a little bit about how in the United States, even though Mayday started here, McCarthyism and Reaganism and a lot of things destroyed labor solidarity, destroyed the understanding of labor militancy and communism in the United States. But it wasn't destroyed, and it continued in the rest of the world. And you can see in the oppressed countries a love of Mayday, even though Mayday in the United States isn't on Mayday, even though it started here. Mayday was adopted as an international workers' day, largely in the Soviet Union and the socialist bloc, but mostly internationally. And they've tried to take that away in the imperialist camp. But in Mexico, Mayday is still alive and well. And we went over the importance of the Mexican Revolution, which was only 7 years or 6 years before the Soviet Revolution, and it was a mass peasant revolution. And the militancy of the Mexican people, the militancy of the Latin American people, and we've seen the pink tide came to fruition in the United States in 2006. I was a 16-year-old. I was absolutely inspired by it, and that was really my first glance and learning about what Mayday was. I think that the next year I tried to make it to Raleigh. I was hoping some of that would be left. That Mayday 2006 was massive. It was demonstrations. I think I remember being in the trailer park. I was into politics. I was living in with my partner at the time and with her family and mostly Mexican trailer park. 95% of the people were from a small town in Guerrero. And I was the person in the politics, and I didn't even know what was going on. Next thing I know, just normal working people were like, "We're going to protest." I'm like, "You don't go protest. That's my thing. What y'all doing?" It's like, "Nah, we got to do this. We're going to Raleigh, vamos." And it was beautiful. The masses of people were barely involved in politics, just the anger and the just outrage against the system, against the indignities that are constantly faced. And that has really been trying to recapture that has really been kind of why I put so much importance on Mayday. I think when I was 17 in 2007, there was still some bit left of that militancy to have another Mayday. I think the tire popped and I never made it. I eventually made it to college, and I organized Mayday in Greensboro where it hadn't been before. And I started working with some of the reformist immigrants' rights coalitions. And I had issues with that. But a lot of that militancy and anger was co-opted and suppressed. I worked for an organization called Reform Immigration for America. And so one of the beautiful and amazing things about Mayday 2006 is the national militancy and pride of the immigrant workers to bring out the flags of their oppressed nations, the flags of Honduras, the flags of Mexico, and say, I might work in the US, but this is where I'm from, and this is what I'm proud of. And that was there. And Reform Immigration for America, which was a organization tied to the Democrats, said, hey, people aren't liking that. Put that away. They made them put away the flags of their home country and suppress them. And they tried to absorb the militancy of the people and suppress it and put it down and use it for the Democratic Party, half of the imperialist establishment. And I witnessed it. It was absolutely disgusting. And I think from that experience, there's a lot we can learn from it. Number one, don't trust the NGO, nonprofit industrial establishment hooked in with the Democrats that wants to destroy your movement. And even I think brother Fox who's organizing there has to deal with these forces constantly on the daily. He might not be able to talk about. And number two, trust in the people. And look to the working class and the most oppressed amongst us for inspiration, because they know what they need, they know what they want. and we are only a vessel and a tool to assist them in getting it. Let's see, Comrade Fox, go ahead.
Well, it's interesting you point you raised about undocumented migrant labour. We have very similar here in Australia as well. We actually traditionally had this what we call the 457 visa scheme and 417 visa scheme. It was actually basically to address the skills shortage. And of course, obviously over COVID, we weren't letting anyone in the country anymore during that time. However, now in certain industries such as farming, like fruit picking, vegetable picking, and all that, there's a lot of migrant labour that works in there, and they're over here for a particular time. They're paid very low wages as well, and then they go back to their country of origin. And really, by rights, this just shows you there's also ruthless exploitation here in Australia, and it's an ongoing struggle about this as well. We also, too, in the sense where we have backpackers coming in from all over the world. Same thing, they might work on particular things or root picking, and even though they might be thinking they're just here for a short term to grab a little bit of extra cash and move on to where they're travelling next, what they don't understand is that they're being ruthlessly exploited as well. And the main people are pushing this big agribusiness. And also Coles and other supermarkets such as Coles and Woolworths, and trying to keep so they can actually extract more profit out of the selling of fruit and vegetables. And that's it certainly is a serious issue. Which and there's one union or two unions have been notably worked with that: Australian Workers Union and the United Workers Union, being involved in a lot of that area as well. But we found it coming into other areas as well, such as construction and other services as well, such as cleaning. And that we actually didn't realise, but there's been a lot of international crime syndicates been involved in this. They made money. It's like a form of human trafficking, whatever. Not to do with the with prostitution or anything like that, but it's actually to do. They can ruthlessly exploit these workers. So you could be a cleaner in a shopping centre. You wouldn't know. Well, someone could be a cleaner in a shopping centre, and you wouldn't know it at the time. But a lot of these people are brought over. They're probably getting paid next to little to nothing. Their passports are seized, and if they say you speak up, well, you're either on the first plane, something's going to happen to you, or your family back in your country of origin. So there's that big there's a big perspective going on there as well. It was interesting a few years ago. I sat down with people and explained a little bit more about what's going on. So yeah, it just like it was such a big eye opener. And such how ruthlessly exploited these people are, and they need to be actually protected at any cost. And but pretty much the only organisations that can do this is unions. Department of Immigration isn't going to do it. The government is, or otherwise any other government department isn't going to do it. But it basically comes back down to back to the unions to do something about it. And I think it's well important. We're the first point of call to do it. We've got a two or three organisations to do work closely with unions. Migranti, which is a Filipino organisation, certainly doing some excellent work there. They're established in every state here in Australia, and obviously a lot of Filipino workers that come over as well, to making sure that they're taken care of and that. But there's also other organisations as well. But it's interesting. I had a situation once where many years ago in Perth, I had these workers come in. They were mechanics. They were from Peru, and when they come to have a meeting with them in a union office, they told me the conditions they had to work under, and same thing again. Had their passports seized. They'll even give me underpaid, just the basics of what we call an award here, which is your basic minimum. They weren't even getting that. And obviously, it is a struggle trying to get that. But so there you go. Even in the auto industry, such as a vehicle repair, and that there are certain elements there that will ruthlessly exploit migrant labour, and that's what this idea is there to do. Once again, the capitalist is in here to make a profit, and a maximum profit as well. And if they can do it by ruthlessly exploiting migrant labour, they will do it. And this is going to be an ongoing struggle for us here in Australia as well. But the most important message we have to get out there: they have to be protected, joined up. And also to start dealing with the conditions and the system that actually gives rise to all this in the first place.
Comrade Morris, any response?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, going back to what Dust said, I want to say that what your story that you told about when you were worked in the factory, about being that kind of worker, highlighted kind of to me anyway, an inherent kind of racism and anti-immigrant sentiment capitalists have against as what's undocumented workers. And that's obviously a big issue in all developed nations, in Australia, the USA, and Britain. You know, racism is a huge part in employment. It's like almost a natural part of employment under capitalism. There is going to be racism and discrimination to that extent. But on the other hand, there is obviously optimism. You know, nations like Mexico. Just you said that Mexico, Mayday is hugely celebrated in countries like Mexico. They love Mayday. They celebrate it. Hundreds of thousands of workers go out in Mexico and Latin America to celebrate Mayday. And that's good. And you know, there is proof behind that too. You know, I've read the book Red Star Over the Third World by Vajay. An amazing book. It says it's a whole book about how the Third World and the developing nations were inspired by the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution in the Soviet Union, and yeah, it's a wonderful thing, and Mexico is a proof of that today. Because at the end of the day, like I think we all agree here, it is thanks to communists why Mayday is such a huge thing. It's the work that communists have done over almost 2 centuries now. So yeah, it's a great thing. So even though racism and anti-immigrant sentiment is a huge part in British, American, and Australian culture, there is the other part that workers in those countries, Mexican workers in Mexico, there is huge widespread support for Mayday to celebrate Mayday. They really understand the importance and the difference that it can make. Yeah, and another point that I want to address that Dust pointed up was that capitalist oppression makes conditions so bad for workers that even non-political people get involved in movements. You said that where you lived, you were pretty much the only political person there, but conditions got so bad for some people, even people who weren't even that political, were getting involved in protests and strikes, and you were like, wait, that's my job. I'm the political person here. That's my job. I go to strikes and stuff. So it just shows that there's an inherent part of capitalism that's going to cause, like a function inherently in part of capitalism that's going to force people to fight against it. It's like a natural part of capitalism. It creates this whole group of people who weren't even originally political to rise up against the system that made them exist in the first place. It's quite strange, to be honest. But yeah, so that's one point I think is quite ironic in the capitalist system. People who you really want to just stay where they are, like the apolitical people, the non-political. I think it's in the interest of the bourgeois to just keep them as they are. But no, the conditions of capitalism make it so bad for them that they have to join us. They have to join our ranks and fight for basic protections. It's insane. This isn't even Mayday isn't really a political thing. It really has nothing to do with politics. It's basic human decency. There is no political agenda behind Mayday. It isn't like the dirty communists infiltrating organizations and pushing our agenda onto mainstream things. It isn't that at all. It isn't even political. Mayday shouldn't be a political thing. It's working people getting basic protections and demanding and fighting for it. That's nothing to do with politics. Nothing. This isn't a political thing. It isn't left or right. It isn't communist versus capitalist. It isn't working class versus proletariat. It's a fight for basic human decency. It's really not that political. And again, as Dust said, siding with the Democrats in the USA, siding with the Labour Party in Britain, and siding with the opposition party in Australia isn't going to change our problems. Voting for the opposition, whether it's Democrats, Labour, or the Liberals in Australia, that isn't going to fix our problem. The system is still going to maintain. The capitalist system is still going to maintain. So, Socialists, so-called socialists, can be like, oh well, this time, this election, we'll vote Labour. Don't bother. It's not going to change a single thing about what the work we do. The work we do is genuinely about improving conditions for the working class. And what opposition parties in bourgeois parliamentary elections don't represent our interests. They're a different class. They're a member of the bourgeoisie, and they have completely different interests to us. So there's no point in siding with them. And again, and then moving on to Comrade Fox, just quickly, one point I want to say is, trade unions nowadays really need to focus and emphasize on including undocumented and trafficked workers, like the backpackers you were talking about. That's a must-have for unions nowadays. There's a massive black market going on right now of undocumented workers that aren't even talked about. These workers are trafficked or are illegal, so undocumented. So they're not included in any statistics, in any government statistics. They're not technically citizens or anything. So they're not taken into account when it comes to national censuses and stuff like census, when people fill out their information. Those human beings are not considered there. So nowadays in the 21st century, there's still a massive amount of work to do that we have to do to fight for working people. And that has to now include undocumented and trafficked people, now more than ever, because they have no protections. They have no legal protections in any developed nation on the planet. Even countries like Sweden and Norway. I have strong connections to Norway. Even those countries, social democratic utopias, do not have protections for undocumented and trafficked people. I'm sure they don't even acknowledge that they exist. So it's very, very telling. So there's a lot of work to be done, but I'm feeling optimistic, and we just have to keep up the fight.
Yeah.
Let's see. We're about an hour and 15 minutes in. Maybe we'll go through some of these comments and have a round of conclusions. I want to give a shout out to Stephen Clary, who says Mexico just nationalized lithium. I try to follow Mexican politics rather closely. A lot of the inspiration from Mexico recently, we talk about the Zapatistas. This is back in the 90s, an armed uprising movement. And really the PRI, the Partido Revolucionario Institucional, has been in Mexico in power for a long, long time. And then the democratic opposition that kind of came in, and then the PAN, there was nothing real. They were all bourgeois parties. And it wasn't until recently that the Morena party with AMLO, Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, which was really a strong independent party, which was a coalition of sections of the national bourgeoisie and the working class, and a good portion of what's left of the peasantry in Mexico, was really a populist uprising. And they came in the power. They were able to go against the money, the people, the coalition of the people, the working class, in concert with sections of the bourgeoisie, were able to overcome the absolute money that was being poured in from the United States to disrupt and control the Mexican democracy. And AMLO has been able to accomplish many great things, and from microloans to small businesses, similar to the model that's going on in Nicaragua. He's been able to fight against some of the corruption and some of the narco trafficking gangs, which are funded and armed. The money is laundered by the United States banks. The weapons are sold by the United States to keep Mexico in poverty. He's been able to fight against that some. They were also able to reject the Western vaccine and bring in Russian and Chinese vaccines. My wife's family was able to have Chinese vaccines, which would not have happened if it wasn't for AMLO and the popular coalition government. And now recently, with, I believe, a fall of U.S. imperialism, the rising of the multipolar world, which is recognizing this tectonic shift, which is Russia standing up against NATO and the NATO Nazis in the EU and asserting their dominance and coming ahead. I mean, they tried to cripple their economy with sanctions, and now Russia was at the ruble is up since the special intervention has took place, and they're linking it to the gold standard, and they're losing power. And I think in this power shifting dynamic, the Mexican people, in coalition with their popular government, is taking back their resources through the nationalization of lithium, and it's a wonderful thing to see. Let's see. I went over maybe any response to those comments before we get some more questions. All right, so we'll move on. There's an interesting shout out to Don Deering, and I'd like to raise this because it's important. We're always talking about union, 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 and we're talking about the history of union. But if you're in a union, you're in the North, and you got a union, you still got problems. Why are we praising the union so much? And here's a comment that's addressing that. Many U.S. unions have been turned into Democratic Party volunteers who give their dues money to Democrats so they can be friendly representative legislators in the government, a losing strategy. And that's actually absolutely correct. But I mean, I gotta remind you, the unions are about the only power we have against the bosses. Even the most corrupt union gives you at least some bit of protections than the non-unions. Brother Fox, any response to that concept in this comment?
Well, look, I mean, yes, in Australia, not every union, but a majority of unions are affiliated to the Australian Labor Party. There's an historical link to going right back to the late 1890s and early 1900s. The Labor Party here was set up by unions in the first place, primarily. Many other organisations were involved, but it was the unions predominantly. I think, look, I mean, I look at it this way. I mean, affiliation, look, the way unions are, even if they disaffiliated tomorrow, right, they're still not going to change their tactic. What we have to actually really need to do is get back in there, because the field is basically being vacated for many years, and we need to get back in there and start putting that line back in and start organising, build fighting unions. It's no point being sitting at the sides and throwing, making criticisms without being involved. Malk actually came up with the quotation where he says, "No investigation, no right to talk." I would add a little bit further: no involvement, no right to criticise. Because if you're not involved, what right you got to criticise it? I mean, and this is why it's vitally important. We need to actually get back in there. So, and especially for those who call themselves communists and socialists and stuff, it's imperative that we are members of unions and actively involved in there, one way or the other. If you're a part-time worker or a casual worker as well, equally important. You're probably paying less dues because of your employment status, but it's vitally important that we are involved in this. This is where a group of workers are, and we need to talk to them. And look, every day I come across people who are members of the Labor Party, but big deal. At the end of the day, it's we want to talk about class and class struggle and but what affects the workers most. We get yes, well, look, ideally the Labor Party and that, also, go away and everything else. We have something different. But it's where we're going to start. We've got to get back in there into the unions and build them up as fighting organs for the working class, and that's what's mostly important. We've got to do, and obviously, I was looking at it, because Norton's actually said something further here. I'll just add that to the screen. It's an interesting point because this is what we're talking. Obviously, workers need class conscious unions need to elect that kind of leadership, certainly, and that's why we need to get back in there, and be involved in that as well. And we actually too got to actually that's our history as well. Communists, all our respected countries, we're imperative of building the union movement. our full organisations. And well, there was some criticisms in the past that were more focus on seizing positions in the game in the union. No, a lot of them, mostly everyone involved, was there to build working class organisation and power, and it's something that we've got to get back into again. And it's good practice as well. We can learn and we can hone our skills even further because we're engaging with workers all the time. We're engaging with their issues all the time. So for ourselves, we're actually enhancing those skills further, and it's vitally important to keep that in mind. So that's why I would actually argue that strongly with everyone. We need to be involved in unions once and for all. Are they perfect? No, they're not. Far from it. It's been all in Australia, UK, US, New Zealand as well. They're far from being perfect organisations. But they're the only working class organisations we've got here. They're actually doing, we haven't got like workers' councils or Soviets or any other type of thing. All we got was unions. So we need to actually look at those bodies and then think, okay, well, how are we going to get involved and moving forward with it? Is it going to be an easy task to turn it around? Certainly not. I don't profess it's going to be easy. On a lot of difficulties, we've got legislation thrown at, very anti-worker legislation thrown at you through some legal minefields, and also a very hostile environment out there as well against organised workers. So, these things. But like I said about earlier about with what happened with Amazon, well, if they can do it, so can we. So, I mean, it's nothing stopping us from doing it. Back to you, Dustin.
Right on, brother. Well, I just want to give some recognition to the people here. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for getting in the conversation, getting in the comments. We try to respond as much as we can. This is why we put the time in to try to do this show, to get these ideas out there. Yeah, shout out to James Graham, who's talking about the different unions in the UK as well. Let's see, Comrade William, any response to that specific comment? Being that that's your country.
Yeah, the UK have quite strong unions. We do have a trades council. Yeah, we have a trade union council, QUCS. We've got lots of different committees and stuff like that are the unions come together to kind of talk about policy and strategy and stuff. I think Britain is quite further advanced compared to the US in regards to that. But like Don Deeren raised earlier, most of the trade unions have kind of pretty much absorbed themselves into the Labour Party, and the Labour Party don't represent the working class anymore. They used to begin with. They were a working class party, but now they've just been pandering to liberal pseudoscience and kind of just hyper liberal social democratic policies. They've lost their path. So a large chunk of the Trades Council is heavily affiliated with the Labour Party, and they've just kind of turned into these social democratic entities. They don't really have anything to do with working class liberation and fighting for the interests of the working class. Old school Labour, absolutely. The Labour Party in Britain was created by socialists and workers, but nowadays they've lost their path. But yeah, so like Don Deeren said to begin with, they've like the unions getting friendly with the Democratic Party. They're a separate thing, but the unions here in Britain have done the same thing. They've just seen the thing that seems to be most progressive and the most sympathetic to their cause, and have just pretty much thrown all they have, all their energy and support to that party, which is just a moderate kind of shell of what it used to be. So it's quite a shame and it's quite demoralising, but there is a good point to make. Yeah, Britain is quite a lot more advanced when it comes to unionising and the union movement than the US seems to be, but there's still a lot of work to do. And I think one of the main reasons why I joined the CPG-BML and left or / kicked was kicked from the YCL was the Communist Party of Britain took a policy that was pretty much forcing their members to vote Labour, a revisionist, reformist party, social democratic party. they couldn't be in a party that kind of represented that and forced their members to vote Labour. I had no interest in voting Labour, but I had to because I was a member of the YCL. So I left that, or slash was kind of kicked. It was kind of a mutual agreement that I wasn't good for them anymore. I didn't really have any interest in being with them. So that's one of the main reasons why I joined the CPG-BML. They have no intention of telling people to vote for Labour. They are an independent, sovereign party. They are an organisation. They're an organisation that's independent from all of the party politics and bureaucracy of British politics. They're a breath of fresh air, to be honest. In the British political landscape of the moderation of political parties and lots of organizations that used to be quite progressive, like the Revolutionary Communist Group, the RCG. It used to be quite a staunch Marxist-Leninist organization. It's now a Trotskyite organization. All they do is have a couple marches a year at relevant dates. That's all they do. And they used to be quite a strong force, the RCG, but now they've been hijacked by Trotskyites. And the YCL/CPB, the Communist Party of Britain, they've kind of slipped into a pro-Labour policy, which has nothing to do with communism. So it's a shame. It's really a shame. That's why I joined the CPG-BML. And thank you, Flame of Liberation, for complimenting my Libya badge. Thank you for that. But that's how I'd respond to that comment. Yes, we are further than other countries when it comes to the trade union movement, but there has been a lot of setbacks recently in regards to joining social democratic organizations that really have no interest in helping out the working class.
Right on, brother. Good response. I want to give a shout out to the Flame of Liberation. We had Nick on here in a previous episode, absolute expert on a number of revolutionary issues and movements. Please subscribe to Flame of Liberation and check out that collaboration that we did earlier. So we're getting into an hour and a half. I think I'll make my concluding remarks, and then have the comrades respond, and we'll call it a night. Thanks for joining, everybody. I want to talk about what William just addressed, and that is the problem of movementism in the Western countries. And I know I talked about how I thought it was a really beautiful thing that in 2006, the immigrant community that saw this big law, this horrible draconian law against them, stood up, and they stopped it from being passed. And it was a beautiful and wonderful thing. But I think and we got to talk about this because of Mayday. And I know there's a lot of young organizers coming up, and they got a lot of high hopes, and they have a lot of ideas that they can make the world a better place. And you can. And I want you to keep trying, but it is a marathon. It is not a short sprint. And I can tell you, do not get burned out. Another thing I gotta say is that the protest cage, which is the same few hundred left people disassociated from the masses in Western countries, the leaders of this protest cage, a good work of political analysts from Caleb Maupin, the leader of the Center for Political Innovation. The masses are the water. The problems with late Marxism is there tends to be too much focus on the protest cage and the protest movements. And they are disconnected from the masses. And we do need to get out there. So I think what I got to say is, for people trying to organize Mayday, organizing is a struggle. To get people, especially in Western countries, urban people, wherever you're at, especially working people, that you work 40, 60 hours. They were fighting for an 8-hour day. I worked 5/12s most weeks. So I mean, so even though William said they were not that bad demands, and they're not, we still ain't got a lot of them demands. And it's a lot of work just to take out to do this show, let alone convincing everybody to come out with stuff. So don't be disappointed if you see the big you see the big Mayday demonstrations of the past, you see the big Mayday demonstrations in the global South, and you pass out the flyers, you talk with people, and not a lot of people show up, and you're like, this isn't working, and I put all this work into it, and ain't nobody showing up to this stuff. That's not what it's about. There's a good line from the Panthers that they would say is a protest is not the revolution itself. It's not the battle itself. A protest is a demonstration. A demonstration is to show something. So a demonstration, it is essentially a military march. It is a demonstration to show the capitalist that we can organize this many people. And the ability to actually organize that many people takes grassroots working class organizations to be able to do that. So, what I can say is focus on building those networks and building those connections, and focus on doing it for the long term. Don't get too caught up in the liberal dominated protest cage. Get out to the masses, talk to your neighbors, build an organization. We want you to come on Working Class Revolt. If you're watching this and you got something to say and you want to join our studies, we want you to come on here and participate. People in the United States, look into the Center for Political Innovation that puts out books and materials and has study groups around the country with the message of getting out to the masses. Let's see, that's going to do it for me. Let's see, Comrade Fox, any concluding remarks?
Well, this has been a great discussion today and tonight with you guys over in Britain and in the US there. I've actually enjoyed every little bit of it. So much to cover. We could be here for hours talking about this stuff. But I think it's right. I think we've all come to agreement with our viewers out there. There's a lot of work to do within it. And it's some interesting analysis point to put there, Dust, too, about protests, everything else. If you don't get the numbers up there, it feels like the world's end. Well, no, that's not what it's about. It's Lenin correctly actually point out the struggle is a long and tedious one as well. And there's going to be ebbs and flows and struggle. At times there might not be much there at all, but it's still continuing there. We have to be consistent. And I think that's actually a very wise word. Let's not burn ourselves out. And I'll actually warn everyone that, because if you go and start doing that, you're just not going to be any good to anyone, including yourself as well. Sometimes it might need to take a step back, reanalyze, do some criticism, self-criticism, moving forward again as well. But also, too, remember, you're not alone in all this. It's great that when you can do it collectively, and you happen to be, if any of our comrades there and respected countries are members of communist parties, it's a great way to do things collectively as well. But even outside what we're trying to do, I've still got other comrades, we can do things collectively as well. So it's something to be wise doing it, but most important is that we keep our focus on that primary force that's going to create social change and change to the system, and that's the working class.
Thank you. What is the name of the think tank that you guys have started?
Yes, that's Australians for a New Democracy, and we're inspired by the Centre of Political Innovation in the USA. When it kicked off, we adopted that name because we're obviously we looked at the conditions. We want something that's applicable to the conditions of our country here as well. I personally wanted to keep it as CPI Australia. But look, that's there it is. I'm acceptable to that as well. But very similar, we're developing a program. Actually, I think it's 3-point program for Australia as well. I haven't got it in front of me. It's still in draft form, and we're looking to do a public meeting, planning a public meeting on the 28th of May. We want to get Mayday out of the way, and obviously there's federal election and all that, and people caught up in all sorts of things. So let's leave it at the end of the May, and we invite some good-minded people to come along and talk, and we discuss about moving forward.
See, Comrade William Morrison, any concluding remarks? Also, put out promote yourself and how to get in contact with you and affiliated organizations.
Yeah, no, I just want to say that tonight's conversation has been incredibly inspirational. I say tonight because it's it's the morning. It's now 1 o'clock in the morning here in Britain. But it's been inspirational, and I've learned a lot from both of my comrades' experiences from Australia and the USA. And yeah, just one thing I think has ran through this entire thing, this entire conversation, is that no one is really alone. Even no matter how alone you feel about your oppression and your experience under the current condition, you're not alone. Mayday, the workers' movement, and the socialist and communist organizations that there's thousands of them all over the world. They're all about solidarity and comradeship. It's building bridges with communities. It's building bridges with different people. It's building bridges between different working and oppressed people. And so yeah, if you feel alone, just don't be. There is support out there. There's a multitude of different entities, parties, organizations, and movements you can get involved with. Mayday being one of the main ones. If you are a working class person and you're dissatisfied and you show a lot of disdain for the current conditions, but you don't really know anybody else that is vocal about those similar issues, then show up on Mayday. Go to your city centre, wherever you are in the world. Go to your city centre on Mayday and just see if anyone's there, and then go up and speak to them. They might be a member of an organisation, and then that's it. You might find a rabbit hole to go into. You have people to speak to. You have a community. You've got a network of support there. So yeah, just go out, speak to people. Don't be antisocial. Communists and socialists are very friendly people. We're very people orientated. Just come and speak to us. We have a lot of stuff to say and a lot of solutions to a lot of problems that exist. So don't be lonely. Solidarity and comradeship and building bridges is what we do. So yeah, and if you want to get in contact with me, my main thing is Facebook. My name's William Morrison on Facebook. Just give me an ad if you want. Just send me a friend request. Other than that, nothing yet. I am going to start my own YouTube channel very soon. So when that's up and running in the future, I can give a shout out to that and encourage people to subscribe to that. But right now, it's mainly Facebook. But I'm branching out. And yeah, I appreciate the continued support. And I've loved being on this and talking about Mayday. It's been inspirational and educational and great. Thank you.
Thank
David,
you. I just got an announcement. I just got an announcement too. Just don't forget about this. Also, this week coming up on the 28th of April is International Workers' Memorial Day as well, to remember those who had actually died at work or died of work-related illnesses or injuries as well. So that's something dear to our heart. It flies into Mayday as well. So look, even if you guys, there might be something happening for your respective trade unions or trade union, such as the trade union councils or trades halls here, which we do, but in the US. But even if you're not directly involved, maybe hold a minute's silence for all those working class people who have died at work or died on the job or died of work-related illnesses and injury as well.
Right on, brother. So that's going to do it for the night. So if everyone could raise their fist and repeat after me, we'll do our ending chant. Dare to struggle.
Dare to struggle.
Dare to struggle.
Dare to win.
Dare to win.
Dare to win.
All power to the people.
All power to the people.
Right on. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you.